Hello, my name is Dennis, and welcome to my trailer park white trash mobile home kitchen. I really do live in a mobile home, in a trailer park, and this is my kitchen. For this video, I thought I would do my Italian meatballs because just recently I did a video and my recipe on my homemade marinara sauce, which I'm going to use for this. One of the good things you can make with marinara sauce is homemade spaghetti and meatballs. In my case, I'm going to make it really homemade because I'm going to use homemade pasta dough to make my spaghetti. But I want to show you my Italian meatballs. I'm not going to show you how to make the marinara sauce and the pasta dough because I already have recipes on the website. And there are YouTube videos that I've done that show how to do that. So I'm going to concentrate on the meatballs today. So having said that, let's get into the ingredients that I use for making my spaghetti and meatballs. These are the ingredients that I use for making my Italian meatballs. As you can see, it's rather extensive. I have 4 large eggs, about half a cup of grated, I'm using Romano cheese, you can use Parmesan cheese. I have a cup of breadcrumbs here. I don't know that I'm going to use all of these. I'll put them in the meat a little at a time until I get the meatballs the consistency that I want. I want them to be dry enough to hold a shape. And then I have a 1/4 cup of chopped fresh Italian parsley. This is 1/2 of an onion that's been caramelized. I buy my onions in bulk and then caramelize them and then portion them and freeze them. If you don't have caramelized onions, you don't need to use them. You can use half of a fresh onion, mince it rather fine, and then put it in a skillet and cook it for a few minutes just so that it's translucent. You want the onions to be tender before you put them into the meatballs. Alternatively, you could use a couple of tablespoons of onion powder. That would work equally as well. I have one tablespoon of garlic powder, 2 teaspoons of salt, 1/2 teaspoon of dry oregano flakes. This is 1/4 teaspoon. This is a 1/4 teaspoon of fresh ground black pepper, and then I have about 1/8 of a teaspoon of fresh ground oregano. And then for the meat, I have 1 pound of ground beef and 1 pound of ground pork. The traditional meat for Italian meatballs is to use 1/3 beef, 1/3 pork, and 1/3 ground veal. Ground veal isn't that easy to find, and it's also rather expensive, so I'm using half pork and half beef. And then I'm going to be browning my meatballs in a skillet, so I have some olive oil here. This is some homemade marinara sauce. If you like a jarred sauce, you can use that. I prefer using my own homemade sauce. I make a lot of it and I portion it into Ziploc bags and keep it in the freezer. This is thawed. And then I made my pasta dough this morning. You don't have to make your own pasta. You can buy store-bought spaghetti. That works fine. This weird setup here is I made my own ricotta this morning. I started off with about a cup of milk. I put in 1/2 teaspoon. I heated the milk up in a saucepan to about 140 to 160 degrees, and I put in about 1/2 teaspoon of tartaric acid. You can use cream of tartar. Stirred that. If it doesn't break into a curd right away, you can add another 1/2 teaspoon of tartaric acid or cream of tartar. That should do it. And then I put it in this little coffee filter thing. This is a really cheap nylon and plastic coffee filter that I use for straining. I bought it for about 99 cents in a grocery store or a department store, and you can see underneath that's the whey that dripped out of it. So that's the ricotta cheese that I'm going to use in my meatballs. So there are all the ingredients that I use for making my Italian meatballs and my spaghetti and my sauce. Okay, I'm ready to start assembling my meatballs here. Everything but the breadcrumbs and the salt go into a large bowl. That's my eggs and my meat, my cheese, my onion, parsley flakes. You can use dry parsley flakes rather than fresh if you want to. I happen to have fresh parsley, so I used it. My garlic powder, my pepper, oregano, and my nutmeg. I like to use nutmeg when I work with beef. I think it's a good flavor to go with beef. And this is my ricotta cheese, homemade. I like to use ricotta. I think it gives a nice moisture. And then I just use my hands. Just get in there. I think the hands are so much more efficient than using a spoon. If using your hands kind of freaks you out, go ahead and use a spoon. I just think this is so much quicker. I usually put this bowl on a rubber mat so it won't make any noise. It makes that noise as I'm working. I'll be careful with this. There, see how quick that is? That's already assembled. Now I can tell by the feel of that that's very moist. So I'm going to start working in my breadcrumbs. I will probably use the entire cup of breadcrumbs. All right, I don't like the noise. I'm putting my mat down. That'll be better. This is starting to come together. It's not quite right. Let's use the whole 1 cup. Okay, that's feeling a lot better. It's starting to feel stiff. That'll hold a shape very well. Okay, now before I put my salt in, let me feel this. Yeah, see, that's a nice consistency. That'll hold the shape very well. What I'm going to do before I put my salt in is I'm just going to take a little portion of this meat, kind of make it into a little flat patty. I will fry it in the skillet and taste it for salt. I'm probably going to use my 2 teaspoons of salt, but I may even add a little bit more salt if I think it needs it. So that's the meatball ingredients joined together, assembled. From here, I start shaping my meatballs and browning them after I've checked this for salt. I've got my skillet heating on the stove. I'm going to put some olive oil in here. This is just regular pure olive oil. This is not the expensive extra virgin olive oil that what's her name, Rachel Ray, likes to call EV. Uh-oh! That's how I pronounce it, EV. Uh-oh! Okay, so a little bit of meat here, just a small smidgen, because I want to taste this for salt. I know it's going to need salt. Just fry that. Okay, that should be good enough. Drain that on a paper towel. And let's see how this tastes. Yeah, that's bland. That needs salt. Okay. Here's my 2 teaspoons. I'm going to blend all this in. And if I need more, and I've got 2 pounds of meat here, so I may be closer to using a tablespoon of salt to get this right. All right, again, shape a little piece into a patty. Turn my heat back on. While this is cooking, I'm going to clean my hands here. All right, let's see what this tastes like. Better, but I'm not happy yet. About another teaspoon of salt. Okay, I'm going to put another teaspoon, easily a teaspoon of salt in there. So total, I'm up to about a tablespoon of salt. Mix this in. I like the consistency of this. This is a nice stiff meat. Okay, one more taste for salt, but this should probably be it. Not a little patty here. These patties are about 1/4 of an inch thick and maybe an inch wide, just so I can taste it. All right, while that's frying, I will wash my hands again. All right, I'm This is my third attempt here. Let's see how this tastes. Yeah, that's it. Oh, that's perfect. All right, so my next step is to start shaping my meatballs, and I'm going to brown them on all sides. Now I'm going to start browning my meatballs. My mother, may she rest in peace, would make her meatballs so big they were like as big as your fist. I use a more traditional meatball. It should be about, I think, about 1.5 inches wide. I think that's a good size for a meatball. So I've got a lot of meatballs to make here and brown. There's no point in you watching me make 24 meatballs. When I'm done here, I'm going to do something different this time about cooking them. So here we are. How does that look? I've got actually 29 meatballs here. I'm going to do something different today. I'm going to cook half of these in the oven. I'm going to put half of them in this little baking pan here, and I'm going to cook half of them in sauce because I just want to experiment to see which way is going to come out better. I'm just curious about the texture of them, the consistency with the two different ways of cooking. So my next step then is to start cooking these either in the oven and in the sauce. As I said, I was going to be cooking my meatballs 2 different ways just to see which I like better. This will go into a 350-degree oven. I'm going to cover this with foil and bake this for 30 minutes. I'm going to put my spaghetti sauce here into this pot, like so. And then bring this up to a boil and just simmer it very, very slowly rather. I want it to simmer just barely boiling to cook those meatballs again for about 30 minutes on top of the stove. I'm going to use my pasta maker for making my spaghetti. This pasta maker comes with this attachment already on it. This is for cutting wide, flat noodles and for very small, square noodles. This smaller set of cutters actually works fine for cutting pasta that looks very similar to spaghetti. I have a spaghetti attachment, so I'm going to use that on my pasta maker. This cuts rounded strands of spaghetti. I cut my pasta in half here because it's a lot easier to work with it a little at a time. I'm going to dust this lightly with flour. I have on the website a PDF on making pasta from scratch. So I have no point in discussing it here. And now I'm just going to start rolling this through. This goes pretty quickly. I made this pasta dough this morning. It's better if it sits for a few hours. It's going to crack around the edges a little bit, but by letting it sit, you get less of that cracking. One more. I'm not going to make my spaghettis this long, obviously. So that's why I have my cutting board here. Cut that roughly in half. And then I'll cut this, I guess half again should be fine. Okay. Dust this one more time with flour. The flour will help the pasta to not stick to itself after I cut it into spaghettis. Move my handle here and then start cutting my spaghettis. And there are my strands of spaghetti. It's very easy to make. I'm going to cut all of this up and then set this aside. And then we'll be ready to start cooking this when we get close to the meatballs being done. You can see how quickly this goes. Homemade pasta, I think, is such a treat. Okay, so I have my other piece of dough to do here, and then my pasta is ready. Here's all my pasta. I do dust this lightly with flour and then just kind of mix it around. What this flour will do is it'll just keep the pasta from sticking to itself. All that flour on the surface is going to come off and float to the surface of the pot, which is actually good if you're going to be using pasta water as a thickening agent. Some restaurants, a lot of restaurants will use their pasta water, they'll save it and put some of it in the dish that they're making because it thickens the dish a little bit. So you can use that. I've used pasta water. You don't save it and put it in the refrigerator for later, but if you cook a lot of pasta and you work back and forth between dishes as the pasta's cooking, you use some of the pasta water to thicken something. So I think pasta water is good to work with. Okay, so now I've got my water heating on the stove. My meatballs are in the oven and in a pot on the stove cooking in the sauce. As soon as my water is boiling and the meatballs are ready, I'm going to cook my pasta. Because this is homemade pasta, this is only going to cook in 2 or 3 minutes, unlike the store-bought dry pasta, which is going to cook in 10 to 12 minutes. One trick about cooking pasta, should you put salt in the water or not? When you buy store-bought dry pasta, it doesn't have any salt in it, and the dry pasta is going to absorb a lot of water when it's cooking. So you put water in the salt, you put salt in the water for cooking the pasta. That will get the salt into that dry pasta as it cooks, which will enhance the flavor. In the case of fresh pasta, because this is already moist, this is not going to absorb any water in the cooking. So you put salt in the pasta dough when you make it, and you don't salt the water when you cook it because it's not going to absorb any water or very little water. What's the point? So that's where you use salt or don't use salt when cooking pasta. My water is boiling here, so I'm going to put my pasta in the water. Because this is fresh pasta, this cooks in 2 to 3 minutes. I'm going to show you a little trick here. I don't know whether you can see this or not. My pot that has my sauce and meatballs in it, I've stacked one of the hobs, one of the grates from the stove on top of this grate to raise the pot up off the flame a little bit. The flame I had it on low. That way I can protect the bottom of the pot. I know that it won't get so hot that the sauce might scorch on the bottom. All right, I'm waiting for my pasta water to come back up to the boil. As soon as it starts boiling again, a couple of minutes, this will be cooked. Then we'll be ready to eat. There is a bowl of homemade spaghetti. The meatball that's not covered with sauce, this is the one that was baked in the oven. I didn't cover it with sauce so we can tell the difference. This is the one that was cooked in the sauce. We're going to taste both to see what they taste like. So the last step in this process is to taste this and see what we've got. Okay, let's see how good this tastes. A little bit of pasta here. Oh, that looks so good. I know this is going to taste good. I mean, I've made homemade pasta so many times, and I know my marinara sauce is good. That is so good. Little piece of a meatball here. See what I got. Tender. The meatball is tender, and yet it's got enough firmness to it. It's got a very nice texture. I want to try my baked meatball and see how this tastes. As far as consistency goes, they're really very much alike. The baked one is a little bit firmer than the meatball that was cooked in the sauce. So there's my homemade spaghetti and meatballs. I'm gonna go have my dinner. For a printable PDF copy of this recipe with step-by-step photographs, visit the White Trash Cooking website and look on the home page or in the recipe archive.